Good morning, everybody. Welcome to my oil painting class. And today we are exploring some textures and painting with a palette knife. We'll be mixing some color. We're getting inspired by this lovely, very simplified image I've done a while ago, but there are loads of soft changes of color and soft changes of tone, and that is what I'd like us to focus on today. Not the maybe a huge variety of color, but is that how we can get the variety of strokes and tonal changes mainly. Yes, we've got some greens, we've got some grays, we've got some bluey grays, but that's minimal volume of color, but a range of tone, a range of subcolors within it. So what we have today, I have some 4 different brushes. So they are flat, tiny bit round at the top, filbert brushes. I have a palette knife, the smallest one I've got because I haven't got a huge piece of work, or any smaller size or pointy end palette knives will be fantastic. I don't have my typical oil mixture today because we mainly will be using thick paint, so we're not going to be using much of the oil. So I just put a drop of white spirit in there. Now, when we do mix our oils, we have a proportion of 3. We have the tips or white spirit, or whichever you might be using, the odorless one, zested, yeah, so the same thing. Too. Our drying component, which is, I've forgotten what it's called now. It will come back to me. And the third one is our oil, linseed oil, or any other oils you might have, which is usually quite dark in color as well. So 3 components, yeah. But today you can use the pre-mixed oils, that's fine, but you only need probably a couple of drops today, so it does matter if you just have some tips as well. Paints wise, I have a chunk of white, and I'll be topping that up because it's going to be our base color. I have some gray blue, or you can mix that one later on anyway. That just helps me to have the volume of it quite quickly. I have some ultramarine, Payne's gray. So Payne's gray does look quite black, so I didn't dilute it to see what the color is. It's going to come out black. I have ochre and some emerald green or phthalo green, or any of those more looking like emerald green colors. Okay, right, and our first task will be I'd like us to mix some different grays. I want us to explore some of the grays we've seen in the painting here. So starting from lighter ones to building up that variety. Now, I'd like us to use first just white and Payne's gray, and we're going to be using the brush, okay? Palette knife is fantastic to mix the colors with. Sometimes takes a bit longer, but we can also pre-mix color with the brush. So what I'm going to start with, that's where I might need a tiny bit of tips just to soften my paint a little bit more. Oh, I think I've got a tiny bit of green on my brush as I was diluting it. Just gonna clean it here for a moment, or maybe even pick up a different brush. Okay, let's pick up a different brush. Right, so some white. So if I were to put it on my sample paper, you're not gonna even see what's the difference between the paper and my paint here. So, and I'm going to pick up some Payne's gray and make an almost solid black here as well. Okay, now to mix colors from bold fresh white to solid black, best thing to do to identify, yes, this is your white, this is your black, and then mix roughly in between tone. So roughly in between gray. There's not going to be perfectly in between, but somewhere not super light, somewhere not super dark. Okay, so if we were to do our tonal ladder, and then I can put it somewhere in the middle. I know we might have done it before in the past. Okay, my board is shining now. See if I can just angle it a little. Okay. Now it will be a little bit easier for me to work the tones out. I can go for adding to this gray tiny bit more of that darkness, yeah? So just a small quantity. And very often that tiniest change, that's when the beauty of the painting comes in. Okay, that's quite a big change. So maybe that's going to be somewhere here. Okay, if I'll mix it with my more medium gray, that's better. And it is, no matter how often we practice this, we mix those tones, subtones, it is always a very valuable exercise. It gets us our eye ready to differentiate the difference. It gives us an opportunity to pick up that small quantity of paint or that small quantity of oil, or how much quickly those changes are going to be happening. Okay, I think that's a bit more of a quicker change. Okay. So it is easier to mix those tones from somewhere in the middle. Or if you give yourself 2 grays, it's easier to do that. And then I'll go, I think I could have quite happily carried on and done more varieties to the darker tone, but I can also see I can do probably more range of tones from this gray to whites. So the limit is you, it's not the space of the paper or the palette. We can make more, and if you can see that change, that's what's important. Even sometimes when we place the tones next to each other, sometimes they're not in the same order. Most importantly, as long as you can see it and say, right, this one should be in that order, or this one need to move somewhere else, just leave it as it is. But spotting it and being aware, this one's lighter, this one's darker, make that analysis. That's what we're looking for. Okay, we're getting slightly lighter still. The reason I'm not leaving gaps between my segments is also I can compare them much easier when they're surrounded by white or gray or whatever the background is. Sometimes it's harder to see that change. Okay, I could quite happily continue this gray further. I just put a little bit of gray of my original white just to make that gray continuing, yeah. I might continue playing as if I were going further, as I've run out of my paper here. And I can continue making my lighter tones. Yeah, and I think probably after this one, my camera might not pick up enough subtones. Although I can see I can probably make a few more. So I ended up, so without counting white, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 plus black and white, yeah. So the more you can create, the better. And the scene is more important. Fantastic. So that's one little sample here. The next one I wanted us to work is to mix our greens. Now we have got our emerald green. So if I'll just put it on a palette on its own. It's quite a bold, strong color. I think I've still got a little bit of gray in my brush, so that's why it's not as transparent or not as solid. So if I mix it with a little bit of white, with that lovely fresh emerald green. But our greens on the painting are going to be not quite as fluorescent. They will be much more earthy greens. So that's why we have ochre. So let's mix a little bit of ochre. And a little bit more of emerald green. Okay. So we need to have it looking much more warmer green in comparison to the fresh emerald green. Okay, that's as much more warmer green. Okay. If you wanted to use a little bit of white, you can use a little bit of white, but sometimes ochre is quite full of white in itself, and this might be enough. What I do also want to try mixing is extra ochre to know how much more yellowy the green could be and how far we need to go when we'll be mixing it. Okay, so that's much more yellowy. Also, by adding more ochre, it does make the color lighter. So not just yellowy, extra warm, but also lighter. Okay, but if I start adding more emerald green to the same paint, it will become immediately darker. But also will start becoming again cooler green. So in now painting, we mainly need to keep our greens warm. So to keep it warm, but keep it darker, because obviously we can't, if we want to keep the green warm, we need to have some ochre and it makes it lighter. So to make it darker, that's when we'll need our Payne's gray. Okay. So what we'll do, we'll have a little bit of a combination of, we'll try to use that warmer options of the greens. So emerald green and ochre, and we'll start mixing it with Payne's gray. So let's have a bit more. So I'll have a mixture of that ochre and emerald green here in a little corner. That's where you can use a little bit of turbs today. Another reason why I'm not using the thick oils today is because the palette knife will need to have the thickness. And if we do use quite a bit of gooey, oily liquid to support our oils today, the chunkiness of the paint will lose its thickness. Okay, it will become much more runnier. So that's why I'm not using it. Right, so I mix my ochre, I mix my emerald green. I'm gonna go for a little bit of Payne's gray, similar to how we were adding to our, as we were mixing our tonal ladder. So if I'll have a small amount, I can even dab it on the side just to see how tiny volume of Payne's gray I'm adding. Okay, so I might just put it on the side here. Sorry, I'm holding my palette so it's reflecting better for you. Showing better for you. Okay, so that's one green. Now I'm going to add a little bit more. So I pre-mixed that warmer green. I want the Payne's gray, sorry. Okay, and tiny bit more. And again. Okay, so they're starting to look a little bit more blackish, but I definitely can see the difference between some of these ones and some of my grayish tones. Okay. So that was green, warmer green with Payne's gray. And I'm also going to do the same using my green, and I'm going to add white to it. So similar to what we did in the first time, but so we've done darkest version first. Now let's do the lightest version. Small amount of, so maybe I'll make it, doesn't matter which way really. I'm gonna do my darkest here. And I'm gonna start adding a tiny bit more white to it. Now, the more I'm mixing it, the more I can see that we're not going to use a lot of this color, but we will need to have more gray added to our green. Okay. So that transition from the trees and the fog light will be created by more gray present in our paint rather than just green. Okay. So as the volume of green is reduced with white, there will also need to be introduction of gray in it. Okay. Well, I'm very happy with some of these greens. We now have done some fantastic grays. It's higher. Oh, excellent. That's not reflecting there.
Julia,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any Payne's gray.
Just go for any black then.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Just go for any black. Payne's gray tend to have a little bit more
Okay.
blue in it, but only slightly. So just go for any ivory
Okay.
black. Will have a dab of brown in it. But yeah, any black will be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Now, if I were to look for some of the grays here, some of the in-between stages, so it's quite easy to do some of the dark tones by using some of those darker greens and the blacky tones. We have mixed some of those grays here. We have mixed some of the in-between greens. We mix some of the light tones, but now it's a transition of between the darks and the lights. So that's where we need to use much more gray and make the green a little bit more duller, kind of that transition period. So what about if we were to mix some neutral gray, so kind of the gray we had in the middle, okay? If you do have a little bit of green on your brush like I do, that's okay. So I have got some white. I'm going to have some black or the Payne's gray. So again, I'm going to make a pile of paint. So I have enough to mix with other colors afterwards. Okay, so I mix it all well. Okay. And I have still a little pile of my green, or if you run out, that was our ochre. I'll just top it up. And emerald green. Okay, so that's another pile. And we're going to mix it together to make an in-between color, kind of as big range. So if before we had white and black, or we had ochre and green, now we're going to have gray and green, okay? And they have a similar tone, so that will be quite interesting. So if I were to put green on one side, I'll get another brush just to show you that range, and gray on the other side. So now we need to produce something in between. So if I'll have my green brush and I'll pick up a small amount of gray. Okay, let's see what that change is going to be. And a little bit more gray. And a bit more. And the nearest to our gray is going to be almost fresh gray, but with a hint of green in it. So I'm almost there. Again, I don't know if you can see it on the screen or not, but I can definitely see it in front of me, that change. Now that green is still, so that's my grayish, still quite green. So if I'll have more fresh white and tiny bit more Payne's gray. So that's quite a nice color. So it's almost gray, but it's still green. And I know that because like if I dilute it, I'll see quite a lot of that greenness in it. Okay, I don't know if the camera picks it up. Maybe just about. So that's how we get our subtones. And that is the quality of kind of that range, those variety of shades comes in. So the tone is the same, but the quantity of green and quantity of gray in it is different. Okay. Right, another exercise I'd like us to do is strokes. So if I'll put this one aside, okay, and I'm going to get another piece of paper here. And let's do a little bit of strokes. Now, first of all, now we are good at making varieties of strokes. And let's start with some of the brush strokes before we come to the palette knife. Now, obviously, the larger strokes, now we can go for any of the colors, any of the grays, any of the greens, doesn't matter at the moment. Whichever you might have most on your palette, or if you want to mix or use any paints you have, that's all good. So I'm using one of the larger brushes. Sometimes it's just good to re-look of what we're doing with our brush. Right, so I've loaded my brush, and I know it sometimes could be patronizing what type of strokes can we make. But if you were to look at the painting and explore certain surfaces, it does teach you quite a lot within such a small image. So we can do some larger strokes using the flat surface of the brush, yeah? So just whole widths of it. We can turn the brush sideways. And if you were doing some of the pine tree strokes, yes, there will be very much those side strokes of the brush. And you can do quite a lot of long shapes, yeah, almost like little boats. You can use different brushes to do the same strokes, but with this one, you just don't have to think. You know, if you turn it sideways, that's what you're going to have. So it's the wide ones, narrower ones, and maybe just sub little dabs, almost like little lines, little dots. Okay. Sometimes we want the strokes to be exactly precise, you know, especially the top strokes. So the shape of them have a lovely edge, okay, almost like a silhouette. Yeah, so if I'll load the brush with quite a lot of paint, I can do much more beautiful strokes, which are almost like a finishing strokes. Yeah, whatever that character of the leaves or whatever that is might need to be just final touches strokes. So that's nice and chunky. And sometimes if I were to maybe take some of my paint off my brush, I just need to rub things in, yeah? I need to fill the gaps in. I need to move one color to another. So if I've got a almost like a smooth, yeah, rubbed in stroke, then I can introduce a darker tone or another color tone, and I can rub another color in. So then those strokes getting a little bit lost, or they're a bit more smudgy strokes, yeah. So our precise strokes usually go on top of any of those shapes. If I wanted to have much more flatter color, might need more paint too. So that's a rubbing approach, rubbing technique, rubbing. That's when we have those subtones moving from one to another, yeah? So if we, in a way, introduce that, in my case, I introduced this darker green, I rubbed it in. So one color is mixing with another. So we've got some soft blend in there. Then I can keep up topping this fresh green, because on the top it still stays much darker. Maybe I'll introduce another. So it's, in a way, it's the same thing what we've done, but just rubs in and mixes slightly more gentler. And then I can introduce a dab of Payne's Gray. Yeah, and start introducing that one together. And I can introduce even more. So that's another interesting technique of strokes and blending. And that's I'd like us to do a little bit more on a larger scale. Okay, so that was one of the brushes. I love my smallest brush when you can do loads of very exciting strokes, because it's reasonably stiff brush. The core of the brush, the bristles are quite strong, and they're holding the paint to the tip. So the strokes could come out different directions. So you can apply it from top to bottom, from left to right, from right to left. So they're not often going to be large or elongated or wide enough strokes, but those dotty strokes, and then you can just have them as a group of something. Yeah, you can just work into them, much more precise. But it's the different directions you can apply them. That's what this brush could help us. And just placing some of these exciting strokes, just putting it around my blob here. It just creates a little bit of movement, yeah, just within the blob of color. Just a small volume of those dots, and we will be using them mainly for the lighter grays today, to have that light illuminating, light moving from the center. When some of the blending, have a look at this tree, yeah? So if we look from a distance, from probably, as you're looking at my screen, we can see a chunk of a pine tree in a distance. But if you look close, it just blobs of gray. It's quite smudgy. It's quite difficult to differentiate any form. Another stroke I want to pay attention to. Right, so I'm just picking up similar green here. It's a smooth or rough stroke. So if I were to paint, I've got my brushes, they're synthetic brushes, quite stiff synthetic brushes, but the surface I produce are quite smooth. Right, if I stroke, put my stroke vertically, you'll see the difference between horizontal strokes, because they reflect light very differently. It's the same color, but changing the direction of the stroke makes the light behave differently. So the same color, one looks a little bit lighter, one looks a little bit darker. If I turn it against, so there's no light reflecting, it's the same, yeah? But very often when we look at the painting, that light differentiation makes a big jump. But that's where the artists use hog brushes. Right, where's one of my hog brushes? There it is. Or a little bit more rougher brushes. I'll go for the same color, but the hog brush will always give you, obviously if you use thick paint, not diluted, not watery, not diluted with oil, will always give you that roughness of the stroke. Okay, so if I were to put it on a fresh paper, it just immediately, yeah, gives you quite a lot of roughness. I have to have a lot of paint to introduce it. And again, it plays, especially here in the center of our painting, some of the textures here, to show something moving towards us. We can use the same tone, but variety of texture. We can use a palette knife to make very, very smooth strokes, but we can also use a hog brush or any rough brushes to produce some texture. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So within the same tone, imagine if that will be a variety of tones as well, but the same tone makes that big difference. Thick paint applied. I'll pick up some more thicker paint. So when portrait painters working on their work, so the face is often done with a range of those brushes. So some surfaces will have quite a roughness to them. Okay, I can't see that way, but you can see it that way. The roughness of that stroke. By building it, almost just per paint in slightly different directions, and the light will be reflecting differently, but then you see the form simply because the light reflects differently on the paint. Okay. Right, another thing, another color we can mix is our ultramarine. And I've got my bluey gray. So if I were to put it next to my gray here, just to show you the difference, it starts to have much more gray blue on its own, looks reasonably dull, but in the surroundings of just plain gray, it starts having much more bluey effect, much more cheerful, yes, very subtle cheerfulness of color. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'd like to, so in a way, that gray blue is my mixed ultramarine and white and Payne's gray in a lighter version, in a big bulk. Okay, so I can use that one at any point. But it's also, shall we mix a little bit of gray and mix some ultramarine with it, almost as what we've done with the green and gray. Okay, so I'll mix some white, actually, if I'll pick it up here. So I have some white, I have some Payne's gray. So again, I'm going for a middle gray tone. Or roughly, not, maybe not too dark. Okay, that's my grayish color. And I'm going to start adding small amounts of ultramarine to it. Okay. And within our painting, when we look at the image in front of us, what we'll be aspiring to, I want us to slowly start spotting which grays might be more greener grays and which grays will be more bluer grays and which grays might be more neutral grays. Again, that's how you enrich your painting, very gently. Okay. So the more blue I add, the more fresher blue it becomes. So at this stage, I'm probably going to start adding a dab of Payne's gray as well. So the color is not going to stay fresher blue, but it will just be getting darker without without becoming fresher. So a little bit of both, a little bit more, again, more ultramarine. Very, very small changes. It's like with cooking, if we put too much salt, oh, by tiny small volume, we know this is going to be way too much. Or some spices. Oh, it's only a tiny bit difference. But something you can really enjoy or something you wouldn't be able to eat. Very small quantity. Okay, that's better. And I think that's where we can have more gray tones on the road, but the lighter tones over the surface of the road is going to have some bluey effects. Yeah. Some of these greens, the gray is going to be greeny grays. Some of them might be more close to the road and pine trees, and maybe more further distance bluey grays. Okay. Right, so if I'll leave this one here as our little reference point. And I have another piece. I've got a gray piece, it could be a white piece. I want to have an overall quick practice of how we'll build up some of the lighter tones and how we'll build up so from the medium tone to light and from the dark tone to medium tones. Okay, so I'm going to look at the center of the painting where we have a lot of darker grays, well, kind of medium grays in the middle, in the center. Okay, so this is probably my painting is ready. My background is ready. If you've got just white, medium gray will be good. Also, having still top up the same color, same tone, is good for blending the colors later. Okay, so it's not a bare surface. So I'm going to have a big rub. Remember how we're doing the application of strokes where we're rubbing the color into the surface. Ideally, it will be an even surface. We don't have any marbling effect there. Okay. Then I'm going to start adding some small amount of white to it. Okay, and I'll introduce it, let's say, just roughly center. Okay, so far we're just going to be doing an overall build-up of that paint. So the first layer was reasonably thinnish because we rubbed it in. The next layer is blending, so I can blend the edges. Some of them will stay a bit more stronger in places, but overall it's nice and soft. Then I can introduce maybe a dab of my blue to make the color. So overall we're making the color slightly lighter and lighter every time. But now we can also start introducing a hint of blue to it. So I'm going to go for my bluey gray. And again, I can still do a little bit of rubbing, but also I can start leaving some of the strokes out on their own. Yeah, those as a bit more precise, more silhouette in standing out strokes. But in some places, everything is soft. And then I can bring again a little bit more white. So it's still gently building up. And again, another layer. So the more layers we add, for the strokes to stand out, they will need to be more thicker. Otherwise, they'll keep mixing. Okay. So now my paint is reasonably thick, and I can use my hog brush, or to be honest, sometimes I don't even need to do that because the strokes come out quite chunky already. So that's my chunky strokes, but very gentle ones, but they've got texture. And that's when the palette knife comes in. I can pick up some thicker paint, some of my gray with extra white. With the palette knife, we just need to make sure we mix the color really well. There is no marbling effect while we're mixing the color. We can have a bit more streaks on the surface of the painting. That's where the playfulness starts. But while we're mixing the color, we need to keep it fresh. And that's when I can introduce maybe a stroke or a few, which will have extra shiny surface, and this will have much more effect to build up the surface, really three-dimensional. So I'll put the same stroke on a flat piece of card here. Because I don't have any support of other paint, it's a little bit harder. I need to put a big chunk of it. My edges staying quite rough, quite dry. Yeah, on its own, it looks quite bold and light, surrounded by a range of gently mixed tones. It sits in that environment. And once we played with that, we can also play with the darker tones. And mix Payne's gray with emerald green. And again, very similar, we can just rub it into the surface of the card, of the paper. Okay, I think if I were to put it here, it's easier for you to see. So it's blacky. Okay, now you can't see that bit. Okay, here we go. So I'm looking now in this corner, yeah, of the painting. if I looked more into all the volume of this one, just to show the principle of it, now we're going to be looking at this one. So first of all, we've got our darker tone. Okay, so if I'll stroke it differently, you can see the reflection of those strokes picks up some light. And it does skip a lot of very darker tones. It goes almost into the medium tones and then almost lighter tones very quickly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use some of my, I'm going to start to, first of all, mixing my emerald green with ochre. Okay, and a dab of Payne's grey. And a dab of white, because we're skipping the most dark tones. Second, I introduce ochre and white, it becomes very light, so Payne's grey need to be back, or your black. Okay, gone too dark, a little bit more ochre. The same principle, just doing a little bit of placement of that rubbing. Okay, I might go a tiny bit lighter so we can see it better as well. So some soft, maybe layers of, yeah, of some of the tree branches will be coming out from the depths. Maybe something tiny bit more lighter with extra ochre and extra white. More ochre than white to get started. Right, I still don't want it to be too light. That's mixed a bit too quickly. And I can go for my little bit more chunkier strokes with a brush. Okay. So maybe those elongated ones. So we're practicing the same strokes we were doing before, but now it's more a little bit more in a situation where they are. Okay, maybe a tiny bit more light. And direction of the little strokes and elongated strokes could be different. We can just build up that volume. Show it to you a little bit more close by. Okay, so that range of strokes can come in. We can also do some of those strokes with a palette knife. Sometimes I do call the technique a palette knife technique if there are loads of, or there is a range of strokes which are very flat in color and applied with an even surface. And sometimes a brush can do that. Palette knife is easier, but sometimes brush does that. So if you're struggling with a palette knife itself, it's okay working with a brush too. Okay, some of those flatter strokes. If you have an old palette knife which has bends and damaged surface or paint stuck to it, you will not be able to do any of the precise flat surface strokes. It just simply wouldn't let you. So cleaning the palette knife at the end of the painting session is very, very important. So these are kind of sub strokes we have. Right, so let's get started with our painting. Now we have worked out the processes. It will go quite quickly now. So I'm going to use one of my gray brushes just because it looks paler than my background, just to sketch the rough shape of the composition. So we've got a very elongated piece here. On the lower part, we have the road. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to roughly place a line to know where the road is going to be finishing horizontally. Okay. Now the triangle of the road comes from the bottom left corner. Okay, and it's not joining the right corner. It's going a little bit further away. Okay, so it's quite a flat, not perfect triangle, but it is quite a flat triangle if we were to finish it as a triangle. And then the central line, which will make an ochre later on. So they roughly in the center at the top, but they still slanting out towards the left for us. So every time we'll be painting, okay, this is going to be jumping at me. This is going to be, these strokes will continue, one on the left and one on the right at all the times as we'll be painting. I'm going to touch my piece so it's not going to be moving. Okay. Sometimes when the board is quite stiff, it's keep peeling off. Right, so that's done. And the next couple of lines I'll need is to identify the big block of light. I quite like the shape of it. It's just off center towards the left with a big chunk of it. And the reason I'm interested into that shape, not only because it's going to be some final strokes will be very exciting there, but it's also to help me out identify some of the shapes of the pine trees, which will be part of the road. It's also keeps me looking. It's almost like a genie coming out from here. Yeah. And then another two lines, one on the left, one on the right, is going to be for a bit more of a, because it's all foggy landscape. But we have on the left, we have almost like a sub darker tone at the top, and somewhere sub darker. Well, we can see that that tree is almost shaping up here. Yeah, so in a way, I'm planning that tree. So when I'll start using quite obscure colors, this is the shape I'm aiming for. So it's not just abstract. It's the shapes of the trees we'll be working into. And if you spot now here, next to this tree, that's exactly what I was talking about. There is a pine tree shaped with loads of texture, same color, with loads of texture. So that's will be quite interesting to do later on. And on the right hand side, we have almost a little division of much more darker tone and slightly that medium tone. I'll keep the darker tone wider as a shape than the medium tone. And overall, our tree lines have a little slant, so they're not straight. Yeah, they've got a little slant to them. So is these ones with a little slant. So the impression is that we are somewhere almost like under the arch of the pine trees, and then the further we go on the road, there is more open into the sky. Right, and how we've done our experiment, we'll do the same here. I'm going to start with some of the darker tones on the left and the right. So I have my brush. I'm going to use some Payne's Grey and Emerald Green. A dab of tips just to keep it a bit more soft. And we're going to rub it in. Okay, that's too light. So a thin layer just rubbed in. Thinnish, not super thin. Okay, mine is looking a little bit too light to what I wanted actually. So I can just add my Payne's Grey here. I'm using more horizontal, semi-horizontal strokes just to reinforce the direction of the branches. When we start painting, the reflection of those strokes will support the shape of the pine trees. Okay, a bit more paint here. I'm going to come close to the road, and there's a bit of a darker line for the road edge. There will be something a bit light on the top. So if we can do that as we do it, that would be fantastic. And I'm gonna try to see if I can drop it. It's any better? A little bit better for you to see. Right, our other dark tone is gonna go on the left-hand side, sorry. Don't want it solid blackish looking, but it is a dark tone. So let's put it at the bottom here. And my other tones will be slightly lighter. So what we did in the past, we use slightly more ochre and maybe a dab of white. Okay, if it will become too light, I know what to do, but let's just try this one first. And I want to put some of this color at the top. As a big chunk. It's okay to go over your sketchy lines. If they dilute the paint, makes it slightly lighter. Dilute meaning in tone dilute. That's okay. We can just we'll be working into those areas anyway. Right, I'm running out of my paint, so I need some more. Payne's Grey, Emerald Green, Ochre, dab of white. Want to connect those two shapes. If they blend and one color is going to another, that's great. And I can see some of this darker version of color with ochre on the right hand side as well. And kind of the border of our dark shape, and some of these strokes could go in a dark shape as well. So let's get that's a very light color I'm mixing, so let's darken it with a bit of Payne's gray. But I can start finding subtones. Okay, you can just about see. I think I might do a tiny bit lighter version. So just a little subtones of rubbing some of the areas where some of the larger branches will be coming out from the darkness. So we're preparing the surface for the lighter strokes coming towards us. We're preparing the surface for things to be paler later on. And possibly, well, we'll need to be adding some more grays. I think I'm going to stop with that. When we're doing the branches, just be careful how you leave the gaps. So they're not, the branch is not the same widths and the gaps are not the same size, if we can. Don't be scared of leaving the darks, but we can also introduce the darks back if we need to. I think I might have lost a little bit of the darks at the top. So I can bring some of these darks back. Now you can be painting from light to dark, but you tend to see which colors are finish, kind of have the finishing touches. So we definitely can see loads of lights as the last strokes. Tiny bit of darkness here at the bottom for me. If I over smudge something, if I wanted to bring anything a little bit more sharp, I can do that. So it's very settled in tone. Just reflect. Right, now let's make some darker grays for our road, and then we'll work into the gray greens and gray blues for the middle tones of our trees. So some white. If I have got a little bit of green on my brush, it's okay, because I'm mainly gonna go for the Payne's gray or black, and that green will get lost. Let's just double check it's dark enough than my existing gray. I think I might add a little bit of blue for my road as well. For the darker tone, I quite like that. Because we're going to be putting some lighter blue on the highlights. I think it would be quite nice to have. Oh, just escaping. A little bit of a hint of blue in there. If you paint over the yellow lines, that's totally fine. Just try to keep the direction of the stroke, so then you'll know where your planned road marks are going to be. Again, if I'll rub that paint from one corner to another, it will be easy for me to apply lighter tones. And we'll go for similar bluey gray or just dark gray for the trees. Here, that's too light. Okay, I need my paints gray top. Okay. Okay, so if I'll go for, now my tree will need to be light overall, but underneath of it, I want to see a little bit of darkness. So if I'll rub that gray into the silhouette of this tree, the branch is going to be going up here. So I'm preparing that surface. And the surface here coming close to green. So if I wanted to add a little bit of green to it as well, or a little bit of blue, that's good as well. So I'm bringing my grays here first as a rubbing, so not too thick. Okay, and now I'm on the border of a very dark green and quite a pale gray. So what I might do, I might blend it in some places and in kind of drag. I think I might need more darker tone actually. My gray might be a bit too thick. So I can always bring all the dark over the gray or the gray over the dark. So I just want to have my green becomes too cool green, I add a bit more ochre. Okay, I want to integrate two colors into each other. Some of this green travels further, some of this green stays. And also I'll do the same at the top, some darker tones and some lighter tones. Some of my paler grays at the top might be more bluey than green. Because the second I add just white, everything becomes too pale, but the blue doesn't dilute the emerald green and makes it that fluorescent color. The blue keeps it a bit more into the gray zone. Again, we're not at the final touches anywhere close. Okay, so we softened two areas. And we're ready to do more greeny grays on the right hand side, bluey grays, greeny grays. So okay, that's too light. So let's have, okay, I'm running out of ochre as well, so I can immediately see how fresh that green is without the ochre. Okay, here's my ochre. I'm still on my grays. Our tonal ladders, and took our time, and now we're suddenly moving quite quickly. Yeah, so that's given us step at a time. Now we're following that as a whole complex. We don't have to mix it and find which color it's going to be. We're working, okay, these are greens, but they need to be grayer greens, or they need to be warmer greens. That concept is at the back of our mind at all times. Okay, that's better. But if you do need to slow down and kind of plan it a little bit more and mix it a bit more precise, that's okay as well. Again, as I'm introducing the strokes, I'm going maybe under some possible those wider branches. I'm trying to produce the strokes which represent those trees, or the light, how the light is spreading. I'm not over worried about the future little strokes. Okay. The paint is quite thick. It's not too runny. Well, it shouldn't be runny really. It's quite dryish. Oh, that lovely glow. Okay, so quite a dark stage. We're going to start introducing some light and more colorful strokes. Right, and now let's start adding some lighter tones. So remember how we were doing some of the paler grays? So let's pick up some white and gray blue, white and Payne's gray and blue, whichever you have. So we need to come up with a slightly lighter version of the gray than, well, at least for me, for my background, depends how dark your background is. Okay, that's too light. I need some more turbs as well, because my turb's gone very mucky. So a little bit darker version here. And now I can finish the rest of the surface. I haven't painted yet. Slightly darker gray, slightly lighter gray. Getting ready for our highlights. Okay. I want to maybe shape this tree up a little. if I'll shrink it too much, I can use my darker tones to bring the shape back. So the effect we're going to have is that fog, and how the suddenly that light coming out from behind the branches. Okay, this tree looks a bit, okay, was too spiky, so I think if I bring some darker initial gray here. In a way, what I'm doing a sub dark gray in a way, by trying to fix tones. And in a way, that's what we'll be working into anyway. So that tree is shaping up more, much better. Okay, so some darks is still left within it. There's some lights coming in as well. Well, medium tones. And similar things are going to happen here on this edge to come out. So far there is a lot of that blending of existing tones by gently introducing subtones. Right, there's some more light here. I can now shrink this branch. This is my light area, but not in full brightness yet. So if the big blocks are now of light ready, now I can use my sorry, is there something there? Okay. Now I can use little shapes, smaller strokes, to go into the trees a little bit. So I'm gonna go for my white, whatever gray I had, and a little more ultramarine, so it's a bluey gray. I want to go with that as almost a light spreader, light traveling further into my branches. It shouldn't be too light, so let's just double check it's not too light over the dark greens. So for example, there might be something going into this layer. There might be something, so I'm mainly going into, if not into the fresh greens, dark greens, but into those sub grayish areas where I already place few strokes. Okay, so some of these ones can come here. I still want to top up my top of my tree, but I think my strokes are too defined for the tree. So I need to be a little bit more settled. There is a chunk of light somewhere here. So if in the last turn we were doing a lot of very runny paint, and now we are working within the thickness of it, within the thickness of paint. Now there are loads of little strokes here, but if I do a couple of slightly larger versions, so the lighter strokes could go on top of these, that will be even better. If I'm introducing a stroke and it feels too light, continue rubbing it in, and it will be much more belonging to that area. The darker paint underneath will take care of that. That's better. Okay, I'm going to shrink that tree here slightly. Okay. Any other lighter strokes which could be introduced and blended in? Okay, if any strokes are too strong for me here at the base, I will blend them. We said we're going to keep the top of the road light, so that's a perfect opportunity to keep it more bluey gray, ultramarine, bluey gray. That will give us some lovely light. Okay. Same as on this one. So we're almost there. We're doing now quite a lot of those chunks. Now where the road, if you don't want to have too bold change of contrast, if you like it and you want to keep it, that's fine. But I'm going to soften myself, just wipe my brush, and I'm almost dragging that darker tone up a little, have a softer edge. But it's okay to keep some of it a little bit more stronger light or a bit more stronger contrast. It's a range what we want to see, the variety. Okay, that's good. Right, any other lighter tones for me here? And then I'm ready to start working into some exciting chunks of thicker paint. And I'm going to start with my greens. I'm going to start playing with my greens. So we had a lot of white, ochre, and emerald green. Ochre should be dominating the emerald green, so it's not going to be a cold color. And remember, if we can't make it dark enough, we need to add some Payne's gray or black. So if my first strokes, I don't want them to be too bold and bright, I'm probably going to have another layer on top of this. Okay, so let's introduce some of those bigger strokes. Yeah. So those could be nice and chunky. Always palette knife like. We're preparing them for one layer following the other. So I've got one color, so I'm just going to go for with the same color in a few places, and then I'm going to change it to maybe slightly cooler one or slightly darker one. A slightly bluer one. I think fresh emerald green could be here too for me. So now I'm not going to be using any turbs. I think that would be quite nice to have the chunks of the strokes integrating with that initial rubbed in paint layer. Playfulness of the strokes is good. I said if a little bit of blue needed just to make, so just the strokes don't come out the same, that's all. In color. Okay, that's lovely. I'm ready for some other colors on it. So I'm going to stop and let's work with this similar color or lighter version of it or grayer version of it could be followed through on this middle ground. Okay, it's a bit too light. So I need to work within the same tone of my grays, but in the green version. A bit more greener edge, that's it. Some lovely big chunks of paint here. Maybe a fresh green for the edge of the road, fresh edge for the other side of the road. Right, any greens on the other side, kind of a similar color. Okay, so my hair, they're mainly integrated with the existing greens. It's not as much in comparison to the right hand side of the road. Okay, that's something a little bit darker, but a bit more softer. So anything else feels like could be added in here before I go even lighter? So if I've lost any darknesses or any definitions, not soft, very soft definitions. Maybe how the trees overlapping or coming over. Okay, that's quite nice. Feel for it. Tiny bit more darkness maybe for me here. If you can't quite get to that stage of blending, if you can see it, that's fantastic step forward. Seeing is part of that understanding. If you're struggling to see why it needs to be slightly lighter or how it's done, that's a bit tricky. We can work with that as well. Okay, so now I can work for even lighter tones. I'm gonna go for paler greens, so then I can finish them off. I can work with a brush, or I can work with a palette knife. I think I'll start with a brush and I'll finish it with a palette knife. Now it's not super light. I think I'm mixing a bit too light. That's better. Only need a couple of strokes just to support our existing ones, and picking up smaller dots, so little shapes will make it more impressive rather than going for very large ones. I think I need something tiny bit bigger here. That's it. A bit too similar stroke, so let's break it down. And some more lighter tones. I'm going to put a couple of lighter tones further back. As I'm going further back, my strokes might need to be smaller. Okay, I think these ones are a little bit too strong for the color, so I'm just going to soften them with my previous color. I think lighter, duller, lighter gray, but not green, would be better for these areas. Good. Okay, anything else for the greens before I move on to the grays? Maybe a couple here. That's personal choice here. Right, that's all good. Right, so now I'm gonna go for much lighter tone. And that's when I'm realizing that I'm running out of white, but I can top it up. So white and gray blue. Let's do that one first. And let's start from some of the chunks of paint. If I'm going for a lighter tone, it will blend with our existing grays. And that's totally fine. Look what's happening. So I started with super light, and this is getting now something in between. And I can just work with my brush. That will be much more better integration of that light, rather than if I keep topping up my colors. So I'm just using the same one. Okay, now I can do a bit of fresh one. Somewhere here in the middle. So I'm preparing the surface now for much fresher light and for the palette knife strokes. So topping up some of those subtones here with the smaller strokes. I'm preparing for the right direction of strokes here as well. Okay, picked up some green by accident. Okay, go over them. Okay, direction of these ones. Maybe little gaps of the light by using some smaller strokes. You can pick up a smaller brush or just whichever you prefer. Quite like continuing with this one. Something on the side of the road. Looks quite a damp, wet environment. Maybe it's been raining. Okay, some light comes through. Okay, my tree looking a bit silly here. Working with my finger at this stage is good. Okay, my finger just didn't leave a smooth enough surface. Okay, that's better. So any of those rough edges need to be smoothed here by the tree again. Direction of the strokes possibly reflecting on the shape of the tree. Now they're much more integrated, yeah, into that silhouette. They become too stripy. I tend to go opposite direction and then bring the direction of the strokes I want them to be. Okay, I think my tree is expanded somehow. If it's expanded, I can bring some fresh light and shrink it. Okay, so that light is slowly coming in. Big flatter areas will show us more open spaces. Okay, and I think I'm more or less ready for my palette knife. Tiny bit more smaller strokes to show the light behind the branches here. I'm using this slightly darker light because they look whitish, but I know when I'll bring my last layer, those are going to be very light strokes. So I'd prefer to do these ones in sub, not quite white. Okay. I remember what we said about thick, bristled, white, thick textured stroke with a hog brush. So now I know where my colors are. I'm just gonna almost like scrape. Okay, that was a gorgeous scrape of them. Tree. That's still not doing the scraping. That's better scraping. But I need more white. So I might do some scraping first and then paint fresh white around it, fresh flat. So scraping meaning just creating some texture with some thicker paint. Okay, some thicker paint. Could be even, I just don't want the texture of the underneath colors coming through. And then I can flatten the surface. Right, let's mix that white first evenly. I'm not gonna make last color fresh white. We said we're gonna do it off white. A little bit of Payne's gray or a little bit of bluey gray. Okay, it's quite a lot of paint there. So I'm going to introduce more, even more thicker paint to have that flat surface. So maybe I need to raise my surface to 5 millimeters of paint if it interacted with the previous layers. Otherwise, you will be lifting them off. Okay, so I've used all my white and I could do this with some more. Nice big chunks. Okay, I'm gonna go around my tree. I think my tree will be easier to do with a brush. There's some nice flat surface in combination with some rougher surface, mixing a little bit more of a gray tone to make it more even. Maybe help myself with a brush here as well. Palette knife is easier to work on a larger scale. So if you do struggle to do some details with it, just pick up a brush to help you. I'm determined to do my pine tree here well. I think its shape could be slightly lighter. Maybe that's why it's remaining quite strong rather than obscure. That's much better. Little help with the brush. Okay, some of this one's a bit too abrupt. And some of the edges became a little bit too sharp here, so I'm going to blend them in again as well. The whole image reads well together. Right, anything here? I think some of this dark green could go over a little more. I'm just looking at all of the painting and spotting any other shapes which could help to see the piece as a whole. And this light could go over as well. That's much better. Roll this straight. And the last parts I'll do will be for my ochre on the road. So I'll use a small brush, a fresh ochre. I don't think I need to mix it with anything. If I'll start my strokes from the bottom of the painting where they will remain fresher. Okay, I have got quite a lot of the gray here. So fresher strokes at the bottom. And then they will blend with the gray as they're going further towards the horizon. I quite like chunky edge at the bottom. And might change direction slightly, that's better. That's it. I'm going to stop at that. So loads of exciting effects, loads of soft changes, but slightly different, a bit more slowed down approach for us today. Thank you very much, everybody. And I look forward to seeing your paintings.